And so here we are, the Estates General finally, this great event. Of course we know that in January the Book of Grievances was drawn up. So on May the 2nd, the deputies begin to arrive at the Palace of Versailles, just outside Paris. The deputies or members are presented to the King. After a few days, on the 5th of May, proceedings begin. At the very first session, the King gives an introductory speech. It's quite vague and quite woolly. After this, Necker announces the royal decree, granting double representation to the third. However, it also upheld the traditional voting by order and not by head. This aroused anger in the Third Estate, who began to refer to themselves as the commoners, or députés des communes. The commoners refused to meet separately, and they feel betrayed when, on May the 6th, the First and the Second Estates agree to voting by order. However, the vote does show a significant number of members of the privileged orders who want change. So, for example, the nobles voted 188 to 46, and the clergy voted 134 to 114. In the last week of May and the first week of June, there's some effort at reconciling the differences between the different parties, but nothing comes of it, and there is a deadlock. Then something happens on June the 4th, which distracts Louis and perhaps makes him more difficult to deal with. The Dauphin dies. Now, the Dauphin is a little bit like the Prince of Wales. He is the oldest son and the heir to the throne. On June the 10th, the Commons, the old Third Estate, announced that they're going to begin to take matters into their own hands, and they start working out how the Assembly will work. They refer to this as the verification of powers. Of course, they were supposed to do this separately. However, the Commons now invite the other orders to join them. And on the 13th of June, the first of the priests from the First Estate cross to the Commons. This priest is followed by others. At this stage, however, the other orders are reluctant to join as a whole, and they organise their own assemblies, so they verify the powers of their own assemblies. Two significant characters emerge during this time. We have Honore Mirabeau and Abbé Sieyès. Both of these men belonged to the privileged orders, the nobility and the clergy respectively. However, each stood for election for the Third Estate, so they were formidable opponents. Now, following a debate on June the 15th, and with the failure of any efforts to reconcile the three estates, the Commons votes on June 17th to rename itself the National Assembly. This is the beginning of an act of revolution. The vote has passed 490 members to 90. And so then they proceed, voting by head of course, to look at taxation. The National Assembly votes, surprisingly, to keep things the way they are for the moment regarding tax, perhaps because they think this is the most sensible of all the options until they get a proper look at the situation. Then on June the 19th, in a move that will force the King's hand, the clergy vote 149 to 137 to join the National Assembly. The King, of course, is outraged, as are his supporters. So on June the 20th, his councillors advise him to call a séance royale in the presence of all the representatives, and they set a date for June the 23rd. Well, in the meantime, they lock the doors of the hall where the National Assembly was meeting, and the deputies of the National Assembly have to move to a nearby indoor tennis court and take the now famous tennis court oath. This is what they swear. They swear never to separate and to meet wherever circumstances demand until the constitution of the kingdom is established and affirmed on solid ground. Interesting that they still use the word kingdom. The oath was a pledge signed by 576 out of the 577 members from the Third Estate and a few members of the First Estate. The oath signified the first time that French citizens, people, formally stood in opposition to Louis XVI, and the refusal by members of the National Assembly to back down forced the King to make some concessions. Interestingly, there is a very famous painting by David of the National Assembly. In this painting, you can actually see in the bottom right-hand corner the one person who didn't sign the tennis court oath. On the 22nd of June, 2 nobles joined the National Assembly and many, many more clerics. But of course on the 23rd, the Séance Royale goes ahead and the 3 orders have to meet separately, and Louis overrules everything that the Third Estate, who have called themselves the Commons, has attempted to pass. He then imposes a reform program with some concessions, but he doesn't get rid of privilege. Of course, when the king leaves, the deputies remain in their place and they reverse everything, so they reconfirm their previous decrees. They also vote 493 to 34 to declare themselves constitutionally inviolable, which really basically means that they are legally allowed to be there and nobody has the right to break them up. Outraged by the king's attempt to take over proceedings, most of the clergy move over to the National Assembly. On June the 25th, 47 nobles join the National Assembly, led by the Duke of Orléans, cousin of the king and supporter of the revolution. He had, of course, recently begun to refer to himself as Philippe Égalité, or Philip Equality.